and literally I would go to the bar with them and like watch a beer being poured and then
Okay.
stare at the pump thing, and I'd be like, okay, that does say 0.5. I've
Yeah.
watched it go into that glass. I've escorted it back from the bar with my colleague who's gone up to order it, and I'm a, wow, and
Okay.
it was an absolute wow moment for me.
Hi, Low No Nation, and welcome to this week's conversation on the Low No Drinker podcast. Today, I am talking to one of my favourite people that I have never met in real life, and that is the one and only Mr. Martin Dixon. Why am I so honoured to have him here? Well, regular readers of the magazine will recognise Martin's name as our resident alcohol-free beer reviewer. When I first started LND over a year ago now, I had no idea how the magazine would pan out. I was literally just pulling things out of thin air. I put out a very nervous post on my very tiny Instagram. And as soon as I saw a little bit of engagement from Martin, I went and checked his page and jumped straight into his DMs. And the rest, as they say, is history. At the time, Martin had a very impressive 800 alcohol-free beer and cider reviews on his page. That number is now up to a whopping 1,500 plus reviews. And I'm guessing that he's going to correct me in a moment and say it might even be a few more. He's recently been inducted into the British Guild of Beer Writers and has launched his own website, so you can go and access his expertise at any time. I am really excited to get to know Martin a bit more. This is a very selfish interview because I want to know a bit more about the man behind these wonderful reviews, which are immensely enjoyable and helpful to readers and members of Low No Nation. So without Martin, I don't think Low No Drinker would be where it is today. So I'm so excited to see him and to chat to him. So Martin, welcome to the Low No Drinker podcast. Thank you very much. How are you doing?
Thank you, Denise. Wow, what an introduction. I'm sure I'm blushing a little bit under all of that praise. To answer your question, I'm doing very, very well. Um, I'm absolutely delighted to be meeting you again through the medium of this podcast, and to have a chance to chat alcohol-free beer, because that is one of my passions.
It is indeed, and it is quite clear to see how much of a passion it is. So, as I mentioned, you were one of the very first people that I interacted with when it came to putting this magazine together. And I went to your Instagram page and I saw all of these beer reviews. And as I said, there were 800 at the time. I know this because I went back and I checked our emails and our correspondence. And I remember just being blown away by not only your amazing reviews and your really accessible ways that you put the beers across to people, but the fact that there was just so many. Even I didn't realize that how many there were. And now you're up to 1,500, is that right? Or are there even more?
I think there's probably about, there's just north of 1,500 on Instagram. I use a spreadsheet at home to keep track, and I also use the Untapped app, and I think both of them are just north of 1,500. And my wife would be the first to say that I have far too many beers which I have not yet reviewed, hidden away in various places around the house. So I gave up trying to keep up uh, with all the alcohol-free beers a while ago. I think there was a moment where I thought somehow I could keep track of all of the ones coming out all in the world, and it thankfully is never going to happen, because the alcohol-free world is just bigger and bigger, and I like it that way.
Yeah, that it's a mammoth job. Before we go too far down that path, because there's so much about beer that I want to talk to you about and gain your insight on, let's share a little bit about your own journey. So I'm aware of some of your background, and we were talking before we pressed record about your international experiences and how they've contributed to where you are now. But what's the journey that led you to explore this world of alcohol-free beer and has made it such a passion for you?
my journey. I think the first thing I have to say is that um, my journey is a very personal one, and that I've been aware of being a advocate for alcohol-free beer in a space where there is large and considerable overlap with people who have different sobriety journeys or near sobriety journeys. So I am very mindful of the fact that not every person who is in this space is in it for the same reason and has similar experiences. But I can only tell my story from my perspective. So uh, from my side, my alcohol-free journey goes back to 2009.
Mhm.
The last alcoholic drink I had was a White Russian. I remember that very well. I had it at about 3 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Eve, uh, 2008, 2009. I then walked home from where I was living in to where I was living in Paris. The walk took about an hour, and I was chatting with a friend of mine who'd come over to spend New Year with me. And I said to him at the time, I said, "Oh, I'm going to do dry January again this year." Um, and I remember having that conversation as we strolled through the streets of Paris at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I remember saying, "Yeah, I've done dry January before. I'll do it again this year." I don't do it because it's something particularly tough. It's not some sort of weird personal Everest. I just like doing it. So that was dry January 2009, which is probably the third or fourth time I'd done it. And then in previous years, there'd always been a reason in February to just go back into old habits. So familiar routines, familiar places, whether it be watching rugby matches or going to gigs or something, there would always be something that just said routine and just kind of slipped back into it. So in 2009, I really enjoyed the dry January part of the start to the year. And then I think almost subconsciously was enjoying it so much that I kind of shied away from having that first drink again. And then we got to the stage, and I kind of remember it was late February, and I'd not been counting days, but then all of a sudden I was thinking, wow, I haven't had an alcohol containing drink for 2 whole months now. I feel pretty damn good on it. It hasn't had a negative impact I can think of. So, you know what? Let's run with this for a while, and let's see where we go with it. So yeah, I think it's probably early March 2009 that I was like, okay, I'm going to try this and see how far it goes. And that was that really. I started to tick off events that I thought might be a little bit difficult. So first gig without grabbing a beer to enjoy during the show, first rugby match I attended in person, first football game I attended in person, and then it just rolled from there. And yeah, I think there were certainly occasions in that first 6 months where I would just kind of it would get to 8 o'clock in an evening, and I'd be like, okay, I'm not enjoying this anymore. I'm done. I'm just gonna go home. Uh, so I think I did recognise that. Yeah, there were lots of circumstances where ordinarily I'd have just gone, okay, cool, I'll have a beer, I'll have a glass of wine, or whatever. Um, but then once I'd worked out in my own mind that actually it's kind of just like a habit, like anything else, and once I'd broken that, I was like, okay, I I like this, and for me, it was always a case around I like this so much. Why would I not keep this going? Because I'm a great believer that in my case, I'm not very good at denying myself things that I like doing.
Okay.
And if I set myself up in kind of competition with myself as like a test of wills and go, like, okay, I want to do this, but I'm going to do this instead. My subconscious lizard brain will always win eventually and just be like, haha, caught you. So I, for as long as I can remember, really just thought of not drinking as something that I enjoy so much that if I drink alcohol, then I no longer get to enjoy my not drinking status, which I enjoy so much. So therefore, the argument becomes a very simple one to win. And I know that if that was something that I could just write down, say to people, and just share it with them, life would be very simple. And life isn't so simple. That's not how it works for a large number of people. But in my case, it was really just that, flipped it round. Am I doing something I like doing? Yes. So I carried on doing it.
And I think that it's perfectly okay to not have a elaborate not drinking story. I was mentioning to you beforehand that I used to apologize a lot. I remember one of the first few times I was invited on a podcast and I'd be asked, what's the journey that led you to stop drinking? And I'd say quite sheepishly, well, I don't really have a stop drinking story. I just realized that it wasn't serving me. And I'd say it in such an apologetic way. But what I've realized over time and speaking to a lot of other people is that there are a lot of people who just want to make a decision that's better for their self, be it for they're doing it for their health, their mental health, their family, whatever the reasons they're making that choice. Not everybody who's looking at these amazing drinks that we'll come on to talk about is doing it out of a physical necessity. And that's okay. It's okay to be coming at this world from whatever angle best serves you, and to have the chance to appreciate these drinks without having to justify yourself to anybody else. The low no world, or low no nation as I refer to us, is not made up of one type of person.
No, I agree. I agree. And your experience of feeling slightly uncomfortable, when asked questions about your own journey, I vividly remember a friend of mine in Paris, where I was living when I stopped drinking, and I'd become aware of through friends of friends, was someone who'd had real issues with alcohol and kind of disappeared for a year. I spent a lot of time back in the States and then came back to France. Um, and I remember having a chat with him, and he'd heard that I wasn't drinking anymore. And he'd been through this whole journey himself, and was attending AA meetings still in Paris, and was still very much kind of, the word would be evangelical about the help that it brought him. And he was very insistent on 3 or 4 occasions that I'd run into him in the bar. He was saying, you really should come along to one of our meetings. I'm not trying to sign you up, but it would just be really motivational for other people to hear how you've been through this and what you've been through and everything. And I found it really difficult to kind of push back on his request, because he was so impressed by what I'd done. And he wanted to kind of unlock some of the secrets behind it. And it made me feel just a little bit uncomfortable, because he wasn't trying to make me feel uncomfortable, but he was praising me and making me feel that I'd unlocked some secret that could be really useful to other people. And I just didn't feel, I never followed through with his invitation. I never felt I could go and sit in that sober space and talk about how I'd unlocked the key to sobriety, almost as he was presenting it, because from my point of view, I was not seeing it at all in those terms. I was just seeing it in terms of, I used to do something, I stopped doing something, I really like the not doing of the thing that I used to think I enjoyed doing, and guess what? Not a lot has changed. So I can completely see, Denise, where you're coming from, and I agree 100% that not drinking is a space that people come to for different reasons and for different durations. And a period of sobriety for me can be, it can be a lifetime, it can be a holiday, it can be a mini break, or it can be a mindful moment where you just have uh, an evening where you don't drink, or literally you have an alcohol-free drink on that next visit to the bar because that's just what you want to do and how you want to remain in control of what's happening around you. So, I think that's something where I agree with you 100%. The low no nation are here for many different reasons.
And it's worth noting as well, isn't it, that the majority of people who are drinking these beers or wines or spirits that are alcohol free or low alcohol are still drinking full strength drinks. So it's not even a case that these drinks are just for sober people. These drinks are for people who aren't drinking whilst they're having that drink. And it doesn't have to be that we're looking any further than that or justifying any more than that. It's while I'm having this particular drink in my hand, I don't want it to have any alcohol in it. And what are the options that I have for that?
Yeah, I agree. I think I have a number somewhere between 70 and 80% in terms of the UK buyers of alcohol-free beer who still consume alcohol at some point. It really is something that the vast majority of the market, as it stands, are people who uh, drink at some moments and don't drink at other moments, and that's something which I'm very happy to promote because I'm not promoting the sobriety side of what I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm promoting the joy of alcohol-free beers and ciders, and then people can take that however they wish, and hopefully discover something which is a means to getting something more enjoyable out of something that they like doing or don't like doing anymore.
Absolutely. And let's talk about these beers then. So what were you a big beer fan when you were drinking full strength drinks? Were you a crafty into all of the nuances of micro brewing? What was it that led you to develop such a passion for alcohol-free beers and ciders?
I'm smiling here because I've done quite a lot of thinking around this subject and kind of
Mhm.
who and what I was a fan of in the past, even though it seems it's 15 years ago. It seems like such a long time ago. Uh, I would say that when I was first drinking in the UK, so early 90s onwards, uh, the craft beer thing, that hadn't happened yet. So it was really, there were real ales and there were lagers, and I suppose I would be more on the drinking of, whatever lager was on tap in whichever pub I went to, but I wouldn't describe myself as being especially kind of loyal to one type. When I moved to France in 2001, I continued to drink beer, but in French bar culture, you don't tend to have a big choice of beers. There tends to be kind of one or two lagers on tap somewhere, and it's more that you order a size of beer rather than one specific type. So that
Right.
encourages you to make it less about the beer and more about the occasion. Um, and I would tend to be, if I was in an Irish bar or a British bar, I would tend to drink kind of the same drink for certain periods of the year and another drink at other times of the year. So
Okay.
my go-to a lot of the time would be I drink Guinness in winter and I drink Corona in the summer. So
Okay.
there you go. For someone who's now something of a craft beer expert, the shock I can share with you today is that my go-to beer for many, many years was a bottle of Corona. Um,
You
uh,
and many
but
others.
I will die on the hill that Corona is a nice beer for those moments where it's not all about the beer. It's about just being with people in an occasion and having something in a glass, in a bottle, and it doesn't have to be. I don't think anyone ever took a swig of Corona and then spent 5 minutes trying to work out, where, what grain have they used
Yeah.
here, and mm, has this been dry hopped? Where's this part coming? It said nobody ever about a
No,
bottle of Corona.
no.
So I say the same thing about Corona Cero, the low alcohol one. It's just it's nice beery fizzy pop. Um, I, I I don't really get the hatred for it that has come from some angles.
Yeah.
So me and me and craft beer
Hmm.
is a journey that started um, purely through the medium of alcohol-free beer, because
Okay.
I remember seeing I remember seeing some cans of craft beer arrive in my local in Paris, kind of probably about 2013, 2014. Um, and I remember seeing these brightly coloured beer cans turning up in the fridge, and people started drinking them. And I remember looking at it, what that weird stuff with the aliens on the side of the can. That's beer, right? Why is it in a small can? What? And people are drinking this, like, okay. And it was a world that I didn't know, and it was a world that at that time was the with alcohol world. So other than seeing it and going, oh, that looks a bit different,
Hmm.
I didn't have any exposure to that world. So it was only it was only when I discovered British alcohol-free craft beer that I became aware of that whole movement and all of the wonderful world of hop varieties and different grains and all of those things. And that's a completely new world to me. But I will still sometimes talk to people who are real crafties, and they'll mention a brewer or they'll mention something that's kind of like super famous, and I'll just blank completely. I'll just be like, no, never heard of them. And that's because if they haven't got something in the alcohol-free space, chances are
Yeah.
I've not heard of them, because I just wasn't in that space at all before.
Okay. So your real love for the artistry of beer making really came to the fore when it came to the alcohol-free beers and ciders and just investigating that world. So you learned it all really as you were going along and started sharing those learnings.
I think very much so. If I didn't pick up an alcohol-free beer until probably about 2012, so I'd been not drinking for 3 years, and I'd just been on the coffees and the San Pellegrino.
Okay.
Um, Alcohol-free beer in bars in France was just like,
Not a
it
thing.
wasn't there. You didn't ask for it. You could get it in supermarkets, but it was whatever version of 00 Kronenberg was out at the time, and that was pretty damn bad. And it was only when I started socializing with colleagues in Germany in about 2012, I think, that they said to me, like, we're having some beers after work, come along. They have alcohol free. And literally, I would go to the bar with them and like watch a beer being poured and then
Okay.
stare at the pump thing. And I'd be like, okay, that does say zero point 0.5. I've
Yeah.
watched it go into that glass. I've escorted it back from the bar with my colleague who's gone up to order it, and I'm a, wow. And
Okay.
it was an absolute wow moment for me. And it then made me realize that the stuff that I was getting in a French supermarket or occasionally at a French football match was, yeah, these were not the same things. These are just wildly different products. So I had a phase where I would bring alcohol-free beer from Germany back from the UK
Okay.
to France, because there were uh, in the middle part of the 2010s there were starting to be a couple of dedicated alcohol-free retailers in the UK online.
Hmm.
Yeah, and they were shipping it across from Germany, and then I would fill my car up in the UK and I would take 7 or 8 boxes of it and take it back to Paris with me. But they would be kind of real special occasion beers for me, because I would know that it was probably only twice a year I could restock. So when I had,
Hmm.
a bottle of Meisel's Weiss or something, it was always just like this big treat for me. So that was, yeah, it was German. It was all about the German beer for me to begin with.
I love that story. It's like the reverse of the duty free car dash that people used to do, going to France and filling up the boot of the car with loads of cheap booze to bring back to the UK. You're doing it in reverse. I love that. And so,
I did have, I did have customs at Dover asked me to flip the boot on the car once, and literally they were like, what's in all the because it was a it was a mini, so it was quite weighed down by having seven
oh
or eight
God, yeah.
cases in it, and they got me to flip the back of the car, and the guy was literally like what's that? Um, and I was like, well, it's alcohol free German beer, and he was quite incredulous. Was like, right, and you're like you're taking that to France? And I was just like, I said, yeah, it sounds weird. I can't get this stuff
Yeah.
in France, and it's really good. And he's like, but there's no alcohol in it. I was like, no, there's no alcohol in it. And he was like, okay, well, yeah, you're not, if it was alcohol, it wouldn't be a problem, because it's kind of an
Yeah.
unlimited quantity. But he just found it very strange that my car would be full up with cases and cases of alcohol-free beer.
I guess it's not something that he saw very much of then, but perhaps now he might be more open to the next person who's doing that. But of course, we've got a lot more route to market for alcohol-free drinks now. In the UK, we were saying before, you're currently in Sweden. You've been in France and in Germany. What's the accessibility like for alcohol free drinks in those places? Because as you'd have seen from the last issue, I did a sort of low no around the world feature, and I'm really interested to see what it's like for people in other places, because the UK is often touted as one of the driving forces for creativity and innovation in alcohol free, but that's always cited next to the fact that Germany is just the biggest producer of alcohol free. And then I know that Sweden have very strict rules about what you can buy in terms of alcohol and where you can get it. And does that apply to their AF? What's it like accessing those drinks now versus when you had to legitimately smuggle them across the border?
Lots of questions about lots of places I know well, so I'll try and tackle them one by one, and
Okay.
we'll start with Sweden first. Uh, you were absolutely right in saying that Sweden has some of the strictest alcohol laws in the world, and alcohol above 3.5% is only available in uh, state-owned liquor stores, which are open uh, limited hours, close on a Saturday afternoon, not open on Sundays, public holidays, and the such like. So they're the only place that you can buy wine, spirits, and beer of over 3.5%. Other than those shops, you have to be on licensed pubs and restaurants, and they would not be licensed to sell for takeaway. It's all for consumption on the premises. For alcohol-free beer, uh, alcohol-free beer can be freely sold in supermarkets alongside kind of weak regular strength beer. And in Sweden, it's alcohol-free beer has just been part of the landscape for such a long time that your average Swedish fridge at home is likely to have a few bottles of alcohol-free, a few bottles of with alcohol beer, and it just really isn't a thing. It's just not a. It's not a. It's not a subject for conversation really. If you have an alcohol-free beer, people don't immediately start asking you about what was your lowest moment? What was it? There's no, there never really has been a stigma attached. I'm the owner of a bar in Stockholm, and I remember shortly after we opened, a road worker who was fixing the street or laying telephone cable or something, came in, boots, the fluorescent vest and stuff, and he came in at about midday. Just walked into the bar and said, what's in Swedish was like, which alcohol-free beers do you have? We had 3 different ones. He was like, I'll have a Nils Oscar, with a glass. And he poured it out to himself, and he drank it pretty damn quickly, and then was just like, that tasted so good. That's just what I wanted. I really just had the taste that I wanted a beer. But obviously, I'm at work. But wow, really good to be able to have like as he said, just really good to be able to have a beer and then go back to my job. And then he just waved and said goodbye and then went back to working outside. And he wasn't trying to be edgy or part of some new scene or movement or make a point about anything. He was just a geezer who was working on the road and wanted a beer at lunchtime, and he just walked in and had a beer and walked out. He respected that it had to be an alcohol-free beer in that moment, but that was what he had. And that's very much the Swedish approach to alcohol-free beer, is that it's never really been like a huge movement. So it's there, but there's never been like so much excitement behind it that causes everyone to suddenly get excited about it all of a sudden. That's Sweden. I would contrast that with let's talk about Germany. Germany has more than 850 brewers currently making alcohol-free beer.
Ooh.
That's an awful lot.
Big number.
It's a big number because in Germany there are so many traditional brewers that have been brewing beer for a long time, brewing beer successfully. Often they're the regional brewery or one of 2 regional breweries that's attached to a town or city locally, and they deliver their beer in bottles to bars, restaurants within their town, and then almost like milk delivery was back in the day in the UK, they're collecting the bottles back in crates and bringing them back and then sterilizing and then rebottling the beer. And they would also supply mineral water, they would supply fizzy drinks, and yet because that's how their local distribution is set up, that's how they operate. If you go to Nuremberg and you have an amazing alcohol-free beer, if it was made locally by the brewery in Nuremberg, there's a very good chance that you will never find that beer anywhere else in Germany.
Okay.
And there's more than 800 of those examples of just really good breweries which make a really good alcohol-free beer and don't shout about it because in the next town 20 kilometers away there's another brewery that sells most of the beer in that town, and they happen to make an alcohol-free beer as well. And that's kind of the German reality of things. So you do get some modern like craft world beers. Hamburg, Berlin, they have some something of a more modern craft beer scene where they rebel a little bit against the conventions of German brewing. But it's still, that's still kind of a minority. And Germany has been just one of the countries that just adopted alcohol free as part of beer drinking life
Yeah.
very quickly. And those same colleagues who introduced me to alcohol free beer in 2012 in Germany, they were already saying, yeah, the alcohol free beer is great. I go out sometimes on a Wednesday night, I'll have 3 of those. I drive home, I've got a big meeting the next day.
Yeah.
It's perfect. Why I don't give it a second thought. None of my friends give it a second thought if someone's with us and drinks 2 liters of alcohol free beer instead of 2 liters of beer with alcohol. They're just like, it's not a thing. So Germany is really in a place where there's been this early tolerance and acceptance, and just really a culture where it really, alcohol was never that big a deal in many respects. So there not being alcohol is not as big a deal. So it's just different. So the final place that I've lived and have a big experience of is France, and France is very different. But that's because France has always had kind of a very tolerant reaction to alcohol. I remember when I first set up a company in France in 2001, we hired probably a dozen or so local French staff who worked with us. And I remember very early on, one of them went out to buy lunch, and we just introduced the idea that we ate lunch at our desks, because that's kind of how we were British and productive. And this guy came back at lunchtime with a sandwich from the boulangerie, and he sat at his desk and was just getting on with a few things at lunchtime. And he had a can of Heineken next to him, and we were watching him. And we're like, what is that? And he was just like, I don't know. Oh, it's just a can of beer. We're like, a can of beer which you are drinking at your desk at lunchtime? And he was like, yes. And we're like, it's something you don't do. And he's just like, but he was like, look, it's not a drink. What he's like, it's one can of beer. It's and literally in his mind, he was just like, well, this isn't a drink. I'm not drinking. It's a hot day. I fancied a beer. This is one beer. This is,
what's the
and
problem?
as he said, the boulangerie doesn't really sell alcohol, but it sells Orangina, it sells Coca-Cola, and it has some cans of Heineken. None of those are really, they're just different choices that you have one of at lunchtime. So France has always had this kind of more tolerant relationship to alcohol. And in terms of alcohol-free beer, there is still a dominance of macro big brewery lager, where people are low expectation, and they have that low expectation met by this product. And for a lot of people, that's kind of perfectly okay, because if you're not mad keen on the beer anyway, that's how you're gonna have your expectations fulfilled. France doesn't have lots of brasseries where you go in and they've got 7 different beers on tap, and they're all not going crazy about the latest Spanish beer that's being made in England and badged with a guy with a hat and a waistcoat on it this year. It's not, the country doesn't get behind beer in the same way. So trying to get people worked up about the idea of alcohol-free beer is a lot harder. There is a French craft beer movement, and you can find, particularly in big French cities, you can always find a real craft shop that's stocking all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and people who are crazy passionate about it. and you can now get British and American alcohol-free beers
Okay.
in those craft beer shops. But in terms of the mainstream, there just isn't really the same interest in beer for alcohol-free beer to be a thing. But alcohol-free wine and alcohol-free aperitifs and spirit substitutes, they are
Growing.
more of a driving factor in France.
Yeah.
There's a lot more interest in those options, I think, than there is in alcohol-free beer.
You mentioned their big breweries, and I wanted to get your thoughts. Often referred over here when people are talking impassionately about the low-no industry, we refer to big alcohol being, the likes of your Peronis and your Coronas, your Diageos and your AB and Bevs. What are your thoughts on big alcohol's move into the alcohol-free space? Do you see it as, is it a positive thing? Is it challenging to, is it too challenging to the smaller brands? What thoughts do you have on how big alcohol's embrace of alcohol-free is impacting the industry?
That is a subject for a whole podcast on its own, and I'll try to throw out some thoughts on
Okay.
a subject which is so broad. But
Yeah.
I'll start with by the positive, non-cynical me, which likes the fact that you can now see a Heineken Zero on a bar top available on draft. You can now see Heineken Zero advertised at the side of a Formula One Grand Prix like we saw at the weekend. And the positive side of me, who wants a world where there is an acceptance that it's okay to drink an alcohol-free beer forever for this round, for whatever occasion it might be. The role of macro breweries in shifting public opinion is very, very significant. And I recognize and salute that. And I think that a world where it's just much more normal for people to be around alcohol-free drinks, to be around people who are drinking alcohol-free drinks, I think that's a good thing. So if that's being driven by Heineken Zero, Peroni Zero, etc., then broadly, I think that's a good thing. However, I am naturally a little bit cynical, and there is a part of me that thinks this is a way of promoting alcohol through promoting the same brand, just with a bit of blue print after it. So, yeah, if there's a Grand Prix in Saudi Arabia and there's Heineken Zero written all the way around everywhere, that also seems to me to be a pretty big advert for Heineken. And if 98% of Heineken's sales are in the alcohol space, then it doesn't really seem to be an act of altruism on behalf of that brewer to be promoting alcohol free, because arguably they're promoting the with alcohol version, and the alcohol free is just a way of doing that. There is also, I have a strong feeling that if macro brewers wanted to make a much better tasting alcohol-free beer, they could do. They really could do. And I have an imagined scenario in my mind of, executives in white coats sat around in boardrooms testing beers, and there's kind of, there's 10 on the table. And number one tastes dreadful, and number 10 is just so amazing. And in most macro breweries, I think they kind of let it get to about as far as number 3, and then they're kind of like, okay, we'll stop there. We'll leave it at the not too terrible part, and we won't make it any more ambitious than that. With the caveat that that's not what Guinness did. And
Okay. Yeah.
Guinness very clearly were like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, ours has got to be a 9 or a 10, or it ain't being launched.
Yeah.
That product is, I'm not a shill for Guinness, but that product is nothing short of miraculous. And I firmly believe that if AB InBev wanted to create a Beck's Blue that tasted like beer, I think they could do, but they've chosen not to. And something which other people I know have said exactly the same thing is that where a lot of people who are exposed to alcohol-free beer for the first time come across the bad ones, so not just picking on Beck's Blue, but it deserves it. But if someone is going to come across one of those in a pub fridge, they're likely to always pigeonhole alcohol-free beer as being it's got a weird sweet kind of taste which shouldn't be there, and the bitterness seems to come at a slightly wrong moment. And no, there's just something there that's not
Just
really
no.
that's just not that good. And that, I think, is doing a massive disservice to some wonderfully talented brewers all over the world who have kind of cracked the code and are continuing to crack the code of how to make this brilliant drink that doesn't contain alcohol but contains a lot of the flavors that people love about beer. And people are being denied access to those by the sharp marketing practice and the big marketing budget of those macro brewers who are just crowding out the better stuff from the market, which they could make themselves, but they choose not to because for whatever reason they don't want their alcohol-free beer to be as good as it could be.
And I think they also have the luxury of they don't have to, because when people are first entering this world, the majority of people will pick a brand that they know. If they drink Peroni, they'll go for a Peroni Zero. If they drink Heineken, they go for a Heineken Zero because it's comfort. We find comfort in that which we already know, and they have the budgets and the marketing and the strength to be able to go. As long as it's drinkable, people will still choose this, and because it's on the side of Formula One or the Rugby World Cup or wherever it is, or the Olympics, Corona Zeros is got the Olympics, then people will continue to purchase it. I think the the biggest challenge I think that big alcohol presents to our industry is that the sheer volume of shelf space that they take, of marketing spend that they take, makes it so difficult for the other brands to get a foot in the door. And this is not to say that, this is commerce, this is business. I understand that this is the world that we live in. I run a business, so I completely understand that it's about money at the end of the day for them. But what happens is they take all this space, some produce subpar liquids. They leave a bad taste in the mouth of people who are trying these things for the first time. And they leave no space for those producers who are going the extra mile, who are bringing out the nines and the tens to get themselves heard, which ultimately means that they're not able to continue. And so my worry is that there's this vicious cycle that's being executed by big alcohol just being too big and not allowing many of the wonderful brands that we feature in the magazine from your reviews to get their voices heard. And that's why, sadly, so many of them, even some that we've featured in such a short space of time, have gone away. And that's really scary.
It's scary when you think of it that way, but it's also consumer behavior is such that so many people who consume beer on a regular basis, they're not overthinking it. They're just
Yeah.
exactly as you said, they've bought into the brand already. there's a reason why 3 years ago they were drinking whatever it might have been, and for the last 2 years they've been drinking Madry. And next year it might move on to being something else that's their main drink. They might move on to drinking Magners with ice cubes in it.
Yeah.
A lot of it is just people are not stopping and going like, wow, is this the best tasting version of this that I could find, or are they just it's they've got other things on their mind. This is available. It fits into a box that they
Easy.
think it
Yeah.
should fit into, and then they're kind of like, you know what, you could tell me that there's a better version of that there's something that, and a lot of people are just, they don't want to hear that. And we have an example of that in the alcohol-free beer world, with the behemoth of brewing from the US in alcohol-free is Athletic Brewing Company. Now, Athletic Brewing Company have maybe 2 or 3 core beers that are available in Europe, and have done a couple of limited releases. Their core beers are really dull. They're 5 or 6 out of 10s. And someone will look at a review that I gave one of them 81 or something and go, it's not a 6 out of 10, but let's go with this. Their core range are really dull, like real kind of, wow, you should do better type of beers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the crazy thing is, if you go to the USA, and I pay to get beers sent over from the US, Athletic Brewing Company have made just some of the most blow your socks off amazing alcohol-free beers that anyone has ever made. Multiple gold medal awards on my site, numerous silvers, just beers where I just go like, done it, they're smacked out of the park again. This one is incredible. And yet the beers they are building their brand with are just really inoffensive. Let's avoid the strong flavors. Let's avoid anything that will kind of upset too many people or excite too many people. And they're building a huge empire based around essentially 3 beers, which are, they're just so middle of the road that the craft beer fan in me and the fan of flavor is just like, oh, release one of the other ones. It's 1,000 times better.
Right.
But they will have taste tested these on people who are just like, oh no, that one, that one tastes a bit funny. Oh, what's that weird sharp aftertaste? And at the end of the day, it's the tyranny of the majority. And there's a lot of people out there who are just like, you know what? Just give me that 6 out of 10. Let me associate with the brand. And you know what? That's what I'm going to aspire to. And that's quite difficult for people who are passionate about something to want to aspire to create something that's inoffensive to large numbers of people. And it almost goes against the passion that so many of us and that I personally have. And yet, this is a company which gets major lineage in Time magazine and in Business Week, and people talking about, it's the unicorn of American brewing and it's worth billions, and when's it going to get taken over by AB InBev or Dr. Pepper or whoever it might be. Yeah. And yet they're pursuing this strategy of, they absolutely can make some of the best craft beer in the world, but at the same time as they are doing that, they make some terrible middle of the road, not terrible, some perfectly acceptable but dull middle of the road beers, and they are the ones that they're building their American domination on. So it's an interesting conundrum.
Indeed. First of all, the tyranny of the majority. Love that phrase. I'm stealing that. I'll give you credit. It's a great
Thank
phrase.
you. Steal away.
We're talking about the flavors, the 6s out of 10s, the 10 out of 10s. I would love to get a few words of guidance for those watching or listening on tasting alcohol-free beers, because they taste different. Okay, they taste different, and people often struggle by committing what I'm now referring to as a cardinal sin of comparing an alcohol-free drink to its alcohol-full counterpart. What tips or advice would you have for those who are venturing into the world of alcohol-free beer in terms of tasting them and finding those flavors that they can enjoy for whatever occasion?
That is a brilliant question, Denise.
Why, thank you.
What I would say is that a couple of bits of advice. Firstly, get it to the right temperature. So the right temperature might be the temperature that's indicated on the can or the bottle. The right temperature might be the right temperature for you. There is a widely available alcohol-free beer in Sweden, which is in lots of restaurants, in lots of bars. And if I ever see it, and it's one of the ones there on the menu, I always ask them if they have a bottle that isn't really, really chilled, because
Okay.
it has a touch of some amber malt to it, and it has just a touch of warmth. And if you chill that down too far, it's a bit like over chilling an English bitter. It just kills it a little bit. So if you have a personal preference for what temperature you like a beer, then respect that a little bit. I would also say pour the beer out, and drink it from a glass. I don't know. I don't think I know any alcohol-free beers that are a satisfying experience if you drink them straight from the can.
Okay.
Perhaps another plug for Corona Cero. If you have that straight from a bottle with a bit of lime stuck in the top, that's probably the best way of drinking it. But that's because that's not really about the beer. That's about the occasion.
Mm-hmm.
So I would also say, if you want to give yourself a chance of enjoying alcohol-free beer, then make it a bit of an occasion,
Mm-hmm.
and give it the chance in your own mind to be something that you look forward to, because we look forward to things that we like as human beings. That's our pleasure centers in the brain. That's what we do. So in the same way that when I had a limited amount of German alcohol-free beer that I brought back in the car in Paris, having one of those beers was something that I would be like, wow, okay, Marks and Spencer's curry. I'm going to have that this evening, and I'm going to have a Meisel's Weiss with this. And I'd pour it out, and I'd look at it and be like, wow, look at that. Oh, love this beer. And then, yeah, I associate that as being it's this treat. It's something which is, all of this positiveness is attached to that. So if you're someone who wants to drink alcohol-free beer during the week, or wants to have an alcohol-free weekend or something, then come back after work on a Friday evening, have that alcohol-free beer, maybe a special one that you've bought, have it chilled at the right temperature, have your favorite glass, pour it out, look at it, appreciate it, turn it into something that you want to enjoy, and you want to be part of that experience. And then it really will become part of something that is pleasurable. If you don't play with your mind a little bit, and if you just kind of open a fridge and you just suddenly see that you've got a 12-pack of Lucky Saint, and you've taken everything else out the fridge, and then you're like, okay, gotta have one of these then.
Yeah.
And you crack one open and then start swigging it from the can. You trudge back to the sofa and go, this is my miserable life now. You're not really giving yourself a fair chance. So create a bit of spectacle around it, look forward to it, put it in a nice glass, and then just take a moment to think, you know what? I like this. And then if you want to take a bit more of a moment to actually kind of appreciate the flavors in it, if it is a craft beer that's been made with a bit of care and attention, then there's no great art to tasting beer. It's really just, it's so personal. It's just taking a moment and thinking about what the flavor is in your mouth, and you can do that on the first sip. You can do that for a few sips, and then you can get on with doing something more interesting if that's what you want. But you might find if you do that there are some hidden depths to some of the alcohol-free beers that you're drinking, or you might find that you weren't that into doing that with regular beer anyway. So why do it with the alcohol-free stuff?
Excellent. Some fabulous tips there, I think. And of course, to keep reading Martin's reviews in Low No Drinker magazine and visiting his website and finding some more great advice for how to appreciate these drinks. My last question to you, Martin, is my barbecue question, which I ask everybody who comes on the show. Now, this is going to be a difficult one for you because you are obviously familiar with so many beverages. But I always ask, imagine it's a nice, I don't know what the weather is like over there at the moment, if it's nice and sunny, if it's Q season.
It's barbecue weather.
Fantastic. So you're off to a barbecue. What, at the moment, I'll say for this moment in time, perhaps rather than for all time, what low no beers would you be bringing with you and the missus to enjoy a nice afternoon in the sun with your favourite barbecue foods?
I have prepared for this one, Denise,
Okay.
and I was sat outside last night, and I was drinking one of these, which is not going to show up, but it's a beer called Hypersonic by Kent craft brewer We Can Be Friends, who are a dedicated alcohol-free brewer, and Hypersonic is their third or their fourth alcohol-free beer, and it's glorious. It's absolutely made for sitting in a English garden,
Mm-hmm.
surrounded by freshly cut grass. It's just a joy of a beer. It's a bit of stone fruit. It's a bit of fluffy peach. It's got a nice kind of feel to it in the mouth. It's got a decent crispness to it, but it's nothing abrasive or too
Mm-hmm.
aggressive. It's just absolutely glorious. So that
Amazing.
is Hypersonic by We Can Be Friends, which is delicious. I would also shout out, and this isn't a north-south bias, but I'd shout out another South of England beer. So any of the Juicy AF range by Only with Love,
Mm-hmm.
just because they're subtle pale ales that blend a little bit of fruit into the recipe, but not in a way that creates a fruity beer. It creates a regular pale ale with just a bit more of something, of body of flavor or
Yeah.
something to it, and it works really well. And Only with Love have expanded their range to 3 or 4 different pale ales this year, and
Mm-hmm.
any of them would be an absolutely fabulous choice for a barbecue. So they'll be my choices. Choose something from Only with Love, or choose Hypersonic
Hypersonic.
by We Can Be Friends, and you can't go far wrong.
Great choices, great choices. And I don't often do this, but I'm going to throw one back at you because it's a beer that you've mentioned a couple of times, which I only discovered a little while ago and I absolutely love, which is the Weiss. It's such a good full-bodied, but it's because I'm not a big beer drinker. As a lot of my time in bars and restaurants was always about wines and spirits. But I tried that and I was like, blooming heck, that's really nice. And then I heard you talk about it and I was like, yes, I picked a good one. Martin likes it too.
Meisel's Weiss was the one that was in the back of my car most often when I brought beers back from the UK to Paris. It's still the OG alcohol-free wheat beer for me.
Yeah.
Oft imitated, pretty much never bettered. I've had a few German wheat beers that have probably run it quite close, but in terms of a brilliant beer just becoming recognised all over the world
Mm-hmm.
because it's so damn good, there isn't a better example than Meisel's Weiss, because they're with alcohol beers. I don't think I've ever seen them for sale anywhere outside of Germany. But this alcohol-free version they have, I've seen it all over the world. And there is a very good reason why it's available all over the world, and that's because it is just so damn good.
It really is. It really is. Martin, tell us, you've recently launched your website. Tell us, first of all, what it is, where it is, and how people can go along and experience some of your great resources.
I'm happy to plug it. My website is at alcoholfree.world, and there you can find out just a little bit more about me, a little bit more about what I do. I still keep Instagram as the main place that I have all of my reviews. So, as you kindly mentioned at the start, there are more than 1,500 reviews on Instagram. The highlights are arranged by flag. So, if you have a preferred country, you can look at the country and you can see various alcohol-free beers. There's probably about 45 countries on there, and the most highest numbered countries, I think, are up to. I think I've had more than 200 English ones, more than 100 Scottish ones, and I'm well north of 100 Canadian ones, Polish ones, German ones. So it really is a broad selection from everywhere. People do ask me, when will I build a website and make every review available with full search capability?
Oh my goodness.
It's something which I think of quite often. It would be a massive undertaking to do it, and yeah, I would do it one day maybe, but I'd probably need someone to offer me a potload of money to build it, and then we can talk. But,
Or
we can dream.
Yeah, and there may be somebody listening now who shares your passion and has those skills. Perhaps this could be a chance to bring you together with somebody, and you never know what could come of it, because there are so many, and you've still got so many more to do. I mean, I dread to imagine how many boxes and crates of beer you've got around you right now that still need tasting.
There are lots. And I have a storage locker, and I have stuff in various places. But equally, I'm relaxed now about the fact that I'm never going to try them all. And I'll read about an amazing beer that suddenly comes out in the USA, and at one stage I'd have been working out ways of getting it shipped, and now I'm kind of like, okay, I'll treat myself a few times a year, and I'll pay for stuff to be moved from one continent to another. But I'm just happy that there's a world where there's brilliant things happening in parallel in different places, that I've been a small part in sharing around the place, that suddenly an alcohol-free beer from Australia is being talked about and shared in group chats that I'm a member of with loads of people in the USA. And they're getting hold of that beer, and it's inspiring them to brew better beers. And that's kind of the world I want to be part of.
It's almost as if we want this, not almost, we want this world to be bigger than just our little piece of it. And if we can help that happen, if we can reach a few more people who didn't know that they had this plethora of choices, then our job is being done well, I think.
Exactly.
Martin, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been an absolute pleasure bending your ear and getting into the nitty-gritty of AF beer with you. And there is so much more that we didn't even touch the surface of. So I'm thinking we're going to have to do another episode in a few more months and just share some more of that passion for the low-no world. We barely even touched on ciders, and then the different types of beers and ales and porters and stouts, and there's just so much, isn't there?
There's so much to cover, and the great thing is that we're never going to have time to cover it all. So let's do this again sometime. But in the meantime, it was an absolute pleasure chatting with you and sharing some things with the Low No Nation.
Thanks, Martin. Take care.
Bye bye.